Imagine a quiet evening where you're ready to relax and let your mind drift into a puzzle. Here's a paradox that might leave you thinking: the story of a crocodile, a child, and a logical riddle that seems impossible to solve. Picture a crocodile sitting by the riverbank, holding a child captive. The parent, filled with anxiety, approaches the crocodile, asking for their child back. But instead of simply releasing the child, the crocodile offers a strange deal. I will return your child, only if you correctly predict what I will do next. It seems simple enough, doesn't it? The parent just needs to guess whether the crocodile will return the child or keep him. It sounds like an easy choice, but this is where the paradox begins. The parent, thinking carefully, decides to make a prediction. You will return my child. Now, the crocodile has two options. First, he could return the child. If the crocodile does this, the parent's prediction is correct. The child is freed, and the deal is fulfilled. Everything goes as expected. But second, if he keeps the child, then the parent's prediction is false. But wait, the crocodile promised to return the child only if the parent's prediction was correct. So, by keeping the child, the crocodile would break his own rule. The crocodile can't fulfill the deal without contradicting himself. What if the parent tries a different approach? Instead of predicting that the crocodile will return the child, the parent says, "You will not return my child." Let's see what happens in this case. If the crocodile keeps the child, the parent's prediction is correct. The crocodile has kept the child just as the parent predicted. But wait, if the prediction is correct, then the crocodile must return the child because that was the deal. But if the crocodile returns the child, the parent's prediction becomes false. If the prediction is false, then by the crocodile's own rule, he should not have returned the child. In both cases, the crocodile is caught in a contradiction. Either choice he makes, keeping the child or returning it, will violate the terms of the deal. This is the crocodile paradox, a perfect loop where logic collapses upon itself. The crocodile's promise to act based on the parent's prediction sets up a trap. The more you think about it, the more you realize that no matter what the crocodile does, he can't fulfill his promise without creating a contradiction. The paradox shows us how delicate logic can be when it's based on self-referential conditions. It's like trying to catch your own shadow. It just doesn't quite work. As you settle into this thought, imagine the crocodile and the parent, both trapped in a puzzle of their own making. The parent's prediction is tied to the crocodile's action, but the crocodile's action is also tied to the parent's prediction. It's a never-ending loop. This paradox, like many others, invites us to pause and reflect. Sometimes, the conditions we set up for ourselves or for others can trap us in a way that seems impossible to escape. The more we try to predict or control, the more we may find ourselves tangled in contradictions. The liar paradox is one of the most famous and simple paradoxes, but it leaves us tangled in contradictions. It starts with a simple statement: "This sentence is false." It seems harmless at first, doesn't it? Just a regular sentence with some words and meaning? But once you start thinking about it, things get a little tricky. Let's break it down. If the sentence is true, then the sentence must accurately describe itself. But what does it say? It says that it is false. If it's true, then it must be false. This creates an immediate contradiction. On the other hand, what if the sentence is false? If it's false, then it must be lying about being false, which means it must be true. And there we go again. If it's false, it's true, and if it's true, it's false. No matter which way you look at it, you can't escape the loop. It's like trying to hold a rope that keeps slipping through your hands no matter how hard you try to grasp it. Every time you think you have a hold on it, it just slips away again, leading you back to where you started. The more you try to resolve it, the more it eludes you. The liar paradox is powerful because it shows us the limits of language and logic. It raises important questions about truth, meaning, and self reference. Can something really be both true and false at the same time? Or does it exist in a state of limbo, never fully one or the other? This paradox also connects to deeper philosophical questions about how we understand the world around us. It challenges our ability to make clear distinctions between what is true and false, what is real and what is imagined. And perhaps, just as importantly, it teaches us that sometimes the answers we seek don't come easily or neatly. In fact, some questions may never have a straightforward answer at all. So, as you let go of the paradox and relax into the quiet of the evening, think about how we encounter these contradictions in life. Whether it's in our own thoughts, our interactions with others, or the way we perceive the world, we are often faced with paradoxes that can't be easily resolved. And maybe that's all right. Sometimes the journey itself, the process of thinking, exploring, and questioning, is just as important as the answers we hope to find. Take a deep breath and let the paradox be, just like the fleeting thoughts that pass through your mind. Not every question needs to be answered. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Sometimes it's enough to simply acknowledge the puzzle and move on, letting your mind gently rest. Paradox of the unexpected hanging. This is the paradox of the unexpected hanging. It's a classic riddle that challenges the way we think about certainty and prediction. The paradox begins with the judge sentencing a prisoner to be hanged. The judge tells the prisoner that the execution will take place at noon on one of the weekdays, Monday to Friday, but with a twist. The prisoner will not know the day of the hanging in advance. The judge states that the hanging will be a surprise to the prisoner, meaning the prisoner will not be able to predict the day of the hanging before it happens. Now, this seems simple enough, right? But here's where the paradox begins. The prisoner, thinking carefully about the judge's statement, realizes something curious. He figures that if the hanging hasn't happened by Thursday, then it must happen on Friday, because Friday is the only remaining day. But here's the catch. Since the prisoner knows this, he now knows that the hanging will happen on Friday, which makes it not a surprise. The prisoner reasons that, since he can predict it, the hanging can't happen on Friday. So, the prisoner concludes that the hanging must happen earlier, perhaps on Thursday. But then, if it doesn't happen by Wednesday, he's back to the same reasoning. He goes through the days, thinking it's impossible for the hanging to happen without him predicting it. In the end, the prisoner comes to a startling conclusion. The hanging cannot happen at all. The prisoner believes there's no way he could ever be surprised by his execution. But when the week progresses, the hanging happens on Wednesday, and it's a complete surprise to the prisoner. The paradox lies in the fact that, despite his best logical reasoning, the prisoner couldn't predict the day of his execution, and the judge's statement was true all along. The paradox. This paradox is about expectation and surprise. It's a situation where the more you think about the future, the less likely you are to accurately predict it. The prisoner tries to use logic to eliminate every possible day, but in the end, he's left with the very surprise he was trying to avoid. The paradox teaches us that sometimes our predictions and logic can get in the way of reality. No matter how much we try to control what happens, There are things beyond our understanding, and surprises can still catch us off guard. A quiet reflection. As you reflect on the paradox, think about the surprises in your own life. How often do we try to predict what will happen only to be caught off guard? The paradox of the unexpected. Hanging reminds us that certainty can sometimes lead us astray. Sometimes, the more we try to predict, the more we miss what's truly unexpected. This is the time traveler's paradox, a thought experiment that explores the strange and mind-bending consequences of traveling back in time. Let's start with the idea of time travel. Imagine you, a time traveler, decide to go back in time. You travel to a moment from your past, maybe a moment you regret or a crucial turning point in your life. The power to change the past is within your reach. You could prevent a mistake, make a better decision, or even meet your younger self and offer advice. But here's where the paradox begins. The moment you change something in the past, no matter how small, it creates a ripple effect, altering the future. A single choice, a single event, and suddenly, the future you know is no longer the same. And that's where the paradox lies. By changing the past, you may alter the very future that led to your decision to travel back in time in the first place. For instance, imagine you prevent a certain event from happening, something you think is crucial to your life. Perhaps in doing so, you alter the course of events so drastically that you no longer discover time travel or never meet the people who made it possible. In this new timeline, the future you came from might not exist at all. If your actions change the future, then how could you have traveled back in time in the first place? The very possibility of time travel begins to vanish, creating a loop with no clear beginning or end. Now, let's take this even further. Picture this. You go back in time to meet your younger self, and you tell them about the future. You give them advice, and they make decisions based on the knowledge you shared. Those decisions change their path, their life, maybe in a way that prevents you from becoming the person you are now. But by changing your younger self's decisions, you've altered the timeline. If the future has changed, how could you have ever traveled back to this moment in time to meet your younger self in the first place? This is the heart of the time traveler's paradox. You've created a timeline where your actions in the past prevent your future self from existing in the same way. Without your existence, how could you have traveled back to the past to make those changes? The very possibility of time travel becomes a contradiction. This paradox also raises questions about causality and free will. If you could change the past, what does that say about your own future? Does altering time allow us to control our destiny? Or are we simply trapped in a cycle where our past, present, and future are all interconnected in ways we can't fully understand? The grandfather paradox is a well-known thought experiment tied to this. It goes something like this. If you travel back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you erase your own existence. But if you never existed, how could you have gone back in time in the first place? This creates a loop of events that defies logic. Some theorists, however, have suggested that time travel might not allow for such paradoxes. One idea, called the Novikov self-consistency principle, proposes that any actions taken in the past are actually part of the timeline that already exists. In other words, if you travel back in time, your actions may be those that were already destined to happen, preventing any contradictions from arising. This would mean that time travel doesn't create paradoxes because everything you do in the past was always meant to happen. However, this idea only raises more questions. If everything is already predetermined, does that mean we have no control over our actions? That we are simply following a path laid out for us? Does time have an unchangeable course, or do we have the power to change it? The time traveler's paradox remains one of the most perplexing thought experiments in logic. It forces us to consider the true nature of time and whether it is something we can manipulate. The paradox suggests that time and the idea of changing it may be beyond our full understanding. If time travel were possible, it might lead to contradictions and loops that challenge our very concepts of cause and effect. As you reflect on this paradox, think about the mysteries of time that we can never fully grasp. The possibility of changing the past is both tantalizing and terrifying. Would we really want the power to rewrite our history? Would we risk creating an infinite loop, a paradox we could never escape? Maybe the true beauty of time lies in its unchangeable nature, in its ability to carry us forward no matter what we do. Galileo's paradox. One of the most intriguing paradoxes in the history of science and philosophy is Galileo's paradox, which challenges our understanding of infinity, size, and the nature of things. This paradox was formulated by the renowned Italian scientist Galileo Galilei in 1632, and it remains a fascinating puzzle for both mathematicians and philosophers today. To begin, imagine a scenario where you have two rooms. One room is incredibly large, while the other is much smaller. Now, if we consider how to measure or count the number of points, items, or elements in each room, the paradox begins to emerge. Galileo proposed that the larger room and the smaller room could, in a mathematical sense, contain the same number of elements or points. This is because both rooms, regardless of their size, can be thought of as having an infinite number of points that can be subdivided infinitely. Let's break that down. In this paradox, Galileo considers the concept of infinity. When you deal with infinity, you enter a realm where conventional thinking about size and quantity breaks down. In the finite world, we think of larger things as having more parts or elements than smaller things. But when it comes to infinity, the rules change. Imagine that you divide each room into an infinite number of smaller sections. According to Galileo's paradox, no matter how large one room is compared to the other, both rooms can still have the same number of sections. How can this be? After all, one room is clearly bigger than the other. This paradox shows that our traditional understanding of larger and smaller gets challenged when we enter the world of infinity. Let's apply this idea to something more tangible, like a line. Suppose you have a line segment that represents a room. If you divide this segment into an infinite number of points, it has, in a sense, an infinite number of parts. Now, imagine another line segment, this one much longer than the first one. By dividing this second segment into infinitely many parts, we might intuitively think it would contain more points than the first one. But Galileo's paradox tells us that both the long segment and the short one, when divided into an infinite number of points, actually contain the same number of points. Both segments have an infinite number of points, no matter how different their lengths. What does this mean? Galileo's paradox helps us realize that when we deal with infinity, our usual notions of size and comparison don't necessarily apply. The idea of larger and smaller begins to lose meaning. In the world of infinity, Two sets of infinite points can be considered equivalent in size, regardless of how different their physical dimensions may seem. This paradox is a mind-bending way of looking at infinity. In the finite world, you can always add more elements to make something larger. But in the infinite realm, things can be infinite in ways that don't follow our usual understanding of size and magnitude. It challenges the very concept of measuring and comparing different quantities in the traditional sense. The implications of Galileo's paradox. Galileo's paradox is significant for a number of reasons. First, it raises philosophical questions about how we perceive and define size. If two rooms, one large and one small, can contain the same number of elements, Graham's paradox. Graham's paradox is one of the most fascinating and mind-boggling paradoxes in number theory. It deals with incredibly large numbers, so large that they exceed our ability to fully comprehend or represent them. The paradox is named after the mathematician Ronald Graham, who introduced it in the 1970s in his work on combinatorics. To understand the paradox, let's first look at the number gram itself. This number is so large that it's impossible to write it down in decimal notation, even if we used all the matter in the universe to do so. The number is the result of iteratively applying the exponentiation operation, starting with the number 4. It grows exponentially at such a rate that it soon becomes incomprehensibly large. To give you a sense of how big it is, consider that it is so large that it cannot be expressed using typical mathematical notation like powers of 10 or scientific notation. Instead of trying to describe the entire number, let's focus on an important part of it. Graham's number was originally introduced as part of a problem in the field of Ramsey theory in combinatorics. The problem involved finding an upper bound for a specific type of hypercube, and Graham used his large number as part of the solution. However, the number became famous because of its sheer size and the paradox it generates. Here's the paradox. Despite the fact that Graham's number is incomprehensibly large, we can actually determine its last digit. Yes, the last digit of this huge number is something we can pinpoint and know precisely, and it turns out to be a fairly simple number. The paradox lies in the fact that the number itself is far beyond anything we can imagine, but its last digit is something small and familiar. The contrast between the vast size of the number and its easily identifiable last digit is what creates the paradox. The paradox itself. This raises an intriguing question. How can a number be so enormous, yet have such a simple and small feature, such as its last digit? Graham's number is beyond any reasonable human comprehension, far larger than numbers like a Google or even a Googleplex. However, the last digit of this gigantic number is something that fits into the typical number system we use in everyday life. The paradox challenges our understanding of large numbers and how we think about them. On one hand, Graham's number represents an upper bound on a problem in mathematics, and it is too vast for anyone to grasp completely. But on the other hand, its last digit, something as simple as the units place in a number, is something that we can easily understand. This creates a bizarre contrast between the size of the number and the simplicity of one of its components: mathematical context. So, what makes Graham's number so unique in the realm of mathematics? The number itself is constructed using a process called Knuth's up arrow notation, which allows mathematicians to express extremely large numbers. In this notation, Graham's number is written as a series of exponential operations that grow so fast that Even after only a few steps, the resulting number is far too large to write down in any conventional way. To give you an idea of how quickly this number grows, consider the following example. In regular exponentiation, we know that 3 to the power of 3 is 27. But in Graham's number, the numbers are raised to power after power after power, creating a cascade of numbers that rapidly exceed our normal sense of scale. As an illustration, imagine trying to write out the number 4 up arrow 4 up arrow 4 up arrow 4 in Newton's up arrow notation. This simple looking expression involves four arrows, and just calculating this number involves an immense number of operations. Graham's number takes this process to an extreme degree, far beyond what can be expressed using standard exponential notation. Why does it matter? Why does the paradox matter, though? Why does it have significance in mathematics? Well, this paradox is important because it sheds light on the strangeness of infinite numbers and the concept of magnitude. It illustrates the differences between the size of something and its components. We are accustomed to thinking that larger numbers are made up of progressively larger parts, but Graham's number turns this expectation on its head. Despite being an unfathomably large number, we can still pin down one of its smallest features, the last digit. This paradox also underscores the limits of human comprehension. While we can conceptualize large numbers and understand their implications in theory, we can never truly grasp the vastness of something like Graham's number. It shows us that there are mathematical realities that exist far beyond what we can imagine or directly observe. The twin paradox, a journey through time and relativity. Imagine a pair of identical twins born at the same moment, sharing the same genetic makeup, the same childhood, and the same experiences, until one day their paths diverge in the most extraordinary way. One twin remains on Earth, continuing life as usual, while the other boards a spaceship capable of traveling at velocities near the speed of light. This setup forms the basis of one of the most famous thought experiments in physics, the twin paradox. At first glance, it seems simple. According to Einstein's special theory of relativity, when an object moves at speeds approaching the speed of light, time for that object slows down relative to an observer who remains stationary. This phenomenon is known as time dilation. In the case of the twins, it means that as the traveling twin hurtles through space at incredible speeds, time ticks more slowly for them compared to their sibling who remains on Earth. When the spacefaring twin returns, they would find that their earthbound brother or sister has aged significantly more than they have. But here's where the paradox emerges. Relativity teaches us that motion is relative. Each twin could consider themselves at rest, observing the other as moving. So why is the traveling twin the younger one upon reunion? Why isn't the situation symmetrical? Shouldn't each twin see the other's clock ticking slower? This apparent contradiction, where each twin could theoretically view themselves as stationary and the other as in motion, leads many to scratch their heads. It seems like a logical loop with no clear resolution. However, the key to unlocking this mystery lies in a subtle but crucial detail: acceleration. The twin who embarks on the cosmic journey does not merely travel at constant speed. They accelerate to leave Earth, decelerate to turn around, and accelerate once more to return home. These phases of acceleration and deceleration break the symmetry. The earthbound twin remains in an inertial frame of reference, moving at constant speed, essentially at rest relative to the spaceship, while the traveling twin switches frames, experiencing non-inertial forces. This difference is what causes the asymmetry in aging. Einstein's equations account for these accelerations, and when they are properly factored in, they reveal that the traveling twin indeed ages less. The longer and faster their journey, the greater the difference in age upon their return. But this isn't just theoretical. Time dilation has been experimentally confirmed. Atomic clocks placed on high-speed aircraft or aboard satellites consistently show a measurable difference compared to synchronized clocks on Earth. In fact, the Global Positioning System, GPS, relies on corrections for both special and general relativity to function accurately. Without accounting for time dilation, GPS devices would quickly become inaccurate by kilometers each day. The twin paradox, while conceptually simple, holds profound implications. It challenges our intuitive notions of time as an absolute, universal flow. Instead, time becomes something fluid, malleable, and dependent on the observer's motion through space. Philosophically, it prompts deep questions. Is aging merely a biological process, or is it fundamentally tied to the fabric of space-time itself? Can we, by manipulating speed and gravity, extend our lifespans relative to others? And what does this mean for our experience of reality? The twin paradox elegantly demonstrates how the universe behaves in ways that defy common sense. It shows us that our day-to-day experiences offer only a limited perspective, and that the true nature of time and space reveals itself under extreme conditions. The unexpected hanging paradox, a sentence full of surprise. Imagine a scenario that sounds like the plot of a strange riddle, but is, in fact, one of the most famous logical paradoxes of the 20th century. It's called the unexpected hanging paradox, and it revolves around prediction, knowledge, and surprise. Here's how it goes. A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but the execution will come as a surprise. You will not know the day of the hanging until the executioner arrives at your cell at noon." At first, this sounds straightforward. The prisoner knows they will be executed one day between Monday and Friday, but they won't know which day until it happens. However, being a clever thinker, the prisoner starts to analyze the situation logically, trying to eliminate the element of surprise. Let's walk through the prisoner's reasoning step by step. First, they consider Friday. Could the execution happen on Friday? The prisoner reasons that it cannot. Why? Because if they are still alive by Thursday evening, with no execution yet carried out, they will logically conclude that the execution must take place on Friday. It's the only day left. But if they can deduce the day, the hanging wouldn't be a surprise. Therefore, the judge cannot schedule the execution for Friday. With Friday ruled out, the prisoner turns their attention to Thursday. If Friday is no longer an option, then by Wednesday night, the prisoner knows that Thursday is the last remaining day. Once again, the surprise element disappears. They'll expect the execution on Thursday. Thus, Thursday is ruled out as well. Continuing this reasoning, the prisoner eliminates Wednesday, then Tuesday, and finally Monday. By this logic, the execution cannot occur on any day of the week without violating the surprise condition. The prisoner feels confident. There is no possible day for the hanging. But here's the twist. On, say, Wednesday, the executioner arrives at noon, and the prisoner is hanged, completely surprised. Despite all their logical reasoning, the paradox plays out. The prisoner's own deduction leads them to expect that no execution will happen, yet the execution does occur, and it is indeed unexpected. So, where's the paradox? It lies in the clash between logical deduction and the conditions of the judge's sentence. The prisoner uses flawless reasoning to conclude the execution cannot happen, but in doing so, fails to predict the actual event. This creates a logical puzzle. The judge's statement appears to be both true and impossible at the same time. The execution happens, and the prisoner is surprised, even though careful reasoning seemed to eliminate all possible days. Philosophers and logicians have long debated the implications of the unexpected hanging paradox. Some argue it highlights limitations in our understanding of self-reference and knowledge, especially when predictions influence future expectations. Others see the paradox as a commentary on the unpredictable nature of human belief. The prisoner's logical approach assumes perfect reasoning and complete knowledge. But in reality, human psychology doesn't always align with strict logical conclusions. In fact, the paradox touches upon deep philosophical concepts, such as epistemic logic, the logic of knowledge and belief, the nature of expectation, and even the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies. The unexpected hanging paradox invites us to question how much we can truly know about future events, especially when our knowledge depends on what others know or intend to surprise us with. At its core, this paradox is not just about prisoners and hangings, it's about the human desire to predict, control, and outsmart uncertainty, and how, sometimes, life finds a way to surprise us, no matter how carefully we plan. The ostrich paradox, ignoring the problem, doesn't make it go away. Imagine a situation in which you're faced with a problem so overwhelming that you wish you could just ignore it. In fact, you might even find yourself deliberately avoiding it, thinking that if you don't acknowledge it, it will simply disappear on its own. This is the essence of the ostrich paradox, named after the old myth that ostriches bury their heads in the sand when faced with danger. At first glance, it seems absurd that anyone would deliberately avoid addressing an issue, but this paradox taps into deep-seated psychological and behavioral tendencies. The ostrich paradox refers to the human tendency to avoid facing difficult situations or uncomfortable truths, hoping that inaction will somehow make the problem vanish. However, just like the ostrich's mythical behavior, this approach rarely leads to any resolution. In fact, it often makes the problem worse. Let's take a look at some real-world applications of the ostrich paradox. Consider personal finances. Many people, when faced with mounting debt or poor financial planning, may choose to avoid confronting their financial reality. Instead of creating a budget or seeking financial advice, they may ignore their bank statements or avoid looking at their credit card balances, hoping that the problem will solve itself. But as anyone who's experienced financial trouble knows, ignoring the problem only leads to further complications, higher interest rates, accumulating debt, and even legal troubles. Similarly, in the realm of healthcare, individuals might avoid going to the doctor when they notice symptoms of an illness, thinking that if they don't seek help, the problem will resolve on its own. Unfortunately, the longer the issue is ignored, the more severe it may become, leading to worse outcomes. But what makes the ostrich paradox particularly intriguing is how it can be applied to broader societal issues, such as climate change or political instability. Often, leaders and individuals avoid confronting these issues head on, hoping that things will improve without active intervention. However, just as the individual ignores their personal financial or health issues, the larger global challenges continue to worsen when ignored. The paradox underscores a critical insight about human nature. We are often uncomfortable with uncertainty and complexity, and so we seek short-term relief by avoiding difficult decisions. Unfortunately, this avoidance strategy may offer temporary peace, but in the long run, it leads to greater problems. The ostrich paradox is a powerful reminder that in order to solve significant challenges, we must face them directly, no matter how uncomfortable it may seem at first. By confronting the problem head on and taking proactive steps, we stand a far better chance of finding solutions. Ignoring it, like the ostrich burying its head in the sand, only delays the inevitable. In conclusion, the ostrich paradox highlights the dangers of avoidance. Whether it's a personal problem, a societal issue, or a global crisis, pretending that something doesn't exist or hoping it will resolve itself rarely works. Acknowledging the problem and addressing it, though difficult, is the only way to make true progress and ensure a better future. The Wise Man on the Square. Paradox, the problem of infinite knowledge. Imagine you're standing in the middle of a bustling square filled with people going about their business. Among them, you notice a wise man known for his incredible intellect and knowledge. He is sitting on a bench, calmly observing everything around him. You decide to ask him a question, something simple yet profound. What do you know? The wise man looks up at you, smiling gently. I know everything there is to know, he replies. But then, after a moment of thought, he adds, except for one thing. I do not know the answer to the question you just asked me. At first, this seems like an odd response from someone who claims to know everything. How can someone know everything, yet not know the answer to this one particular question? This, in essence, is the wise man on the square paradox, a thought experiment that explores the limits of knowledge and the paradoxes inherent in knowing everything. To understand this paradox, let's break it down. The wise man, by definition, knows everything. This would include knowledge about the universe, history, philosophy, science, and every single possible fact. In a world of infinite knowledge, there should be no question he cannot answer. So, when asked what he knows, he gives an answer that would seem to contradict his supposed infinite wisdom. However, the moment he admits to not knowing the answer to this very question, he introduces a contradiction. If he is truly all-knowing, then there should be no limit to his knowledge, no area of ignorance. But the wise man himself has acknowledged an unknown, the answer to the question of what he knows. This paradox invites a deeper consideration about the nature of absolute knowledge. If someone knows everything, does that mean they must always have a response to every inquiry, including those about their own knowledge? Or does the very act of acknowledging a limitation in their understanding, by admitting they do not know their own knowledge, create a paradoxical situation? This paradox can be expanded to a larger philosophical debate. In our own world, we might ask whether true knowledge is ever possible, or whether our perceptions of what we know are, in fact, limited by the very nature of our understanding. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we do not know, and this process never seems to end. Furthermore, the paradox also raises questions about self-awareness and the limits of certainty. Can someone truly understand themselves completely, or is there always something about their own thoughts, feelings, or knowledge that remains beyond their grasp. The wise man, by claiming infinite knowledge, seems to contradict himself by acknowledging that there is something he doesn't know, the answer to his own knowledge. This paradox also touches on the concept of epistemic humility, which suggests that despite our best efforts to understand the world and ourselves, we must accept that some things are simply beyond our comprehension. The wise man, who represents infinite knowledge, paradoxically shows that knowing everything might also involve an awareness of the limitations of our own understanding. In the end, the wise man on the square paradox challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Is it truly possible to know everything, or do we reach a point where the pursuit of knowledge becomes an endless journey, with new questions emerging even as we find answers? By acknowledging that there might be something beyond our grasp, something we cannot know, we not only demonstrate wisdom, but also embrace the infinite complexity of the world around us. In doing so, we might come closer to understanding that true knowledge is not just about acquiring facts, but about recognizing the limits of our knowledge and remaining open to the unknown. The twin strategy, paradox, a clash of logic and strategy. Imagine two identical twins, Alice and Bob, who are both incredibly talented at playing a particular game, a strategic card game that requires both skill and foresight. They decide to compete against each other to determine who is the better strategist. But there's one twist. Alice and Bob are allowed to discuss and agree on a strategy before the game begins, but they must use it without any further communication once the game starts. Before the game begins, they agree on a plan. We will both adopt the same strategy and play in an identical manner, ensuring that no matter what the other player does, we will always mirror each other's moves perfectly. This seems like a solid strategy, and both are confident that it will work to their advantage. However, the game proceeds, and something unexpected happens. The moment the game starts, Bob begins to win. He uses the strategy they both agreed upon to outmaneuver Alice at every turn. The more Alice tries to follow the strategy and mirror Bob's moves, the more she falls behind. It seems that Bob is always one step ahead, despite both players having agreed on the same strategy. This is the essence of the twin strategy paradox. Both Alice and Bob had the same plan, but the paradox emerges when their identical strategy leads to conflicting outcomes. How can two people who agreed to play the same way end up with different results? The paradox is a reflection of how, despite perfect symmetry in the strategies and intentions of both participants, subtle differences in the implementation of those strategies can lead to wildly different results. In essence, the paradox challenges the assumption that perfectly identical plans and actions will always lead to identical outcomes. This is especially true when the game involves complex, strategic thinking, where small variations can lead to drastically different results. In real life, the twin strategy paradox can be applied to many situations, including business strategies, competition, or even relationships. Two individuals or groups might agree to follow the same set of rules or strategies, but the way they execute those strategies can differ based on personal judgment, interpretation, and ability to adapt to changing circumstances. This could lead to one person succeeding while the other fails, even though they started with the same plan. Moreover, the paradox speaks to a larger concept of the butterfly effect. The idea that small changes in the initial conditions of a system can lead to vastly different outcomes. In this case, the seemingly minor differences in how Alice and Bob interpreted and implemented their strategy lead to drastically different results. What's also fascinating about the twin strategy paradox is how it challenges the concept of fairness and equality. On the surface, Alice and Bob agreed to an identical strategy, which should have made the game fair. However, the paradox suggests that even in a perfectly fair system with the same set of rules, the smallest difference in execution can completely alter the outcome. This forces us to reconsider how we view fair competition and how outcomes are determined in real world scenarios, where factors like skill, timing, and decision making play critical roles. In the end, the twin strategy paradox reveals that outcomes are not always determined by the plan itself, but by how those plans are carried out in practice. It invites us to reconsider our assumptions about the predictability and fairness of competitive situations and reminds us that even in the most structured environments, unpredictability can still emerge. The Cartesian labyrinth paradox, navigating knowledge and reality. Imagine that you're walking through a labyrinth where every corridor and path is perfectly mapped out. The labyrinth is an intricate network of pathways, each seemingly leading you to another intersection, some offering a dead end and others leading to new twists. You are following a map, carefully tracking your movements, convinced that if you simply follow the directions, you will eventually reach the center of the labyrinth. But here's the twist. The map you are following was created based on the very same labyrinth you are navigating. The map doesn't exist independent of the labyrinth, it's a direct reflection of it. In fact, the map is simply a simplified, idealized version of the maze, showing you where each path should logically lead. Yet, every time you attempt to move forward, you realize that the actual labyrinth doesn't quite align with the map's instructions. This is the essence of the Cartesian labyrinth paradox, a philosophical and logical dilemma that challenges our understanding of knowledge and reality. At the core of the paradox is the tension between the mind's conceptual understanding, represented by the map, and the world as it exists in reality, represented by the labyrinth itself. When we think about knowledge or any system of understanding, we often rely on models, maps, or abstractions that are meant to represent the real world. However, the paradox suggests that these abstractions, while useful, may never fully capture the complexity of the reality they represent. The map and the territory, the limits of representation. The Cartesian labyrinth paradox can be understood in relation to the map-territory distinction, a concept popularized by philosopher Alfred Korzybski. Korzybski argued that a map is not the territory it represents. A map is merely a model of the territory, an abstraction designed to help us navigate it. The problem arises when we mistake the map for the territory itself, forgetting that the map is just a simplified version of reality, with many elements lost or altered in the process of abstraction. In the context of the labyrinth, the map is the conceptual model of reality, while the labyrinth represents the actual, lived experience. As you follow the map, you are essentially navigating through an idealized version of the world, one that does not account for all the nuances and complexities of the labyrinth itself. But if you rely too heavily on the map, you risk getting lost in the maze of abstraction, unable to navigate the actual labyrinth properly. The paradox deepens when we realize that the map was created based on the labyrinth in the first place. The labyrinth and the map are interdependent. and each is an incomplete reflection of the other. In essence, the map is not a perfect representation of the territory, and the territory cannot fully exist without the map. This recursive relationship creates an infinite loop where the representation and the reality constantly fail to align, and you are left unsure about how to navigate through either one. Implications for knowledge and understanding. The Cartesian labyrinth paradox has profound implications for our understanding of knowledge. It challenges the notion that any system of knowledge, whether it's a scientific theory, a philosophical argument, or a personal worldview, can perfectly represent the complexities of the world. No matter how detailed or well constructed the map of knowledge is, it can never fully capture the entirety of the territory it is meant to represent. This paradox is particularly relevant in the fields of philosophy, cognitive science, and epistemology, where thinkers have long grappled with the limitations of human understanding. How can we ever truly know the world if our only access to it is through conceptual models, theories, or perceptions? Even the most sophisticated maps of reality, whether they are scientific models or our personal beliefs, are always, in some sense, incomplete. The paradox also invites reflection on the nature of truth and the process of discovery. As we try to make sense of the world, we often rely on models or frameworks that guide our understanding. However, these models are never static. They evolve as new information is discovered. Just as the map of the labyrinth may need to be updated or revised to account for new twists and turns, our understanding of reality must also be flexible and adaptable to new insights. The prisoner's dilemma, the conflict between self-interest and cooperation. Imagine a situation where two criminals are caught by the police. They are arrested and placed in separate cells, unable to communicate with one another. The authorities offer each prisoner the same deal. They can either cooperate with their partner by staying silent or betray their partner by confessing to the crime. The rules are simple. If both prisoners stay silent, they will each receive a moderate sentence, say 2 years in prison. If one betrays the other while the other stays silent, the betrayer will go free because they cooperated with the police, and the silent partner will receive a heavy sentence, say 10 years. If both betray each other, they will each receive a somewhat severe sentence, but not as harsh as the case where one betrays the other. At first glance, it may seem like the rational choice for both prisoners is to betray the other. After all, if one betrays and the other stays silent, the betrayer goes free. But if both betray each other, they receive a relatively lesser sentence compared to the worst-case scenario where one stays silent while the other betrays. So, the dilemma is, should the prisoners cooperate and both stay silent? Or should they betray each other, hoping to avoid the worst-case scenario? The paradox of rational self-interest. This is the essence of the prisoner's dilemma, a paradox that illustrates how rational individuals, acting in their own self-interest, may end up in a worse situation than if they had cooperated. If both prisoners act rationally and betray each other, they will each serve 5 years in prison, even though they could have both served only 2 years if they had both stayed silent. The paradox lies in the fact that each prisoner has a strong incentive to betray the other, assuming that the other will cooperate. From each individual's perspective, betraying the other seems like the best choice, because they risk getting the maximum sentence if they cooperate while the other betrays. This leads both prisoners to betray each other, even though both would be better off if they both cooperated. This paradox raises important questions about the nature of cooperation, trust, and social behavior. Why do people often fail to cooperate, even when it would benefit them? The prisoner's dilemma is a stark reminder of how self-interest can sometimes undermine the collective good. Applications in real life. The prisoner's dilemma isn't just a theoretical puzzle. It has practical applications in economics, politics, and social behavior. For example, it can explain why countries sometimes fail to cooperate on global issues, such as climate change or arms control. Countries might have the opportunity to work together to reduce carbon emissions or limit nuclear weapons. But the fear that the other country might not uphold its end of the deal leads each country to act in their own self-interest, thereby ensuring that no progress is made. In business, companies often face a version of the prisoner's dilemma when it comes to pricing. Two competing companies might both benefit from setting higher prices, but the fear that the other company will lower prices to gain a competitive advantage often leads both companies to undercut each other, resulting in lower profits for both. The prisoner's dilemma also has implications in interpersonal relationships. Friends, colleagues, or even spouses might face situations where they are better off cooperating with each other, but the fear of being taken advantage of may lead them to act in their own self-interest, which in turn can lead to misunderstandings or conflicts. The iterated prisoner's dilemma. One way to resolve the paradox and foster cooperation is through the concept of the iterated prisoner's dilemma. In this version of the game, the prisoners play the game multiple times, allowing them to build trust and develop strategies over time. Research shows that in repeated interactions, cooperation can emerge as the optimal strategy. The key to cooperation in an iterated version of the dilemma is tit for tat, a strategy where a player initially cooperates and then mirrors the other player's previous move. If the other player cooperates, the player continues to cooperate. If the other player betrays, the player retaliates by betraying as well. The beauty of the iterated prisoner's dilemma is that it shows that cooperation can emerge even in situations of self-interest, provided there is enough opportunity for repeated interaction and the ability to learn from the other player's behavior. Over time, cooperation becomes mutually beneficial as players realize that working together yields better long-term outcomes than betraying one another for short-term gain.